Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit Committee on the 8th of November. I'll start off. Someone else just coming into the room. I think I'll start off with apologies for absence. Have we got any apologies?
Yes, Chair. We've had apologies from County Councillor Joanne Watkins.
Thank you. Just so we can get introductions out of the way, people here who are not on the list of councillors attending the meeting, if you could just identify yourselves and give your job title. So if I begin on the far left with Mr. Wathen.
Thank you, Chairman. Andrew Wathen, Chief Internal Auditor.
Peter Davis, Chief Officer for Resources.
You want to introduce yourself, Nicola?
Nicola Perry, Democratic Services.
Over there.
Richard Jones, Performance Manager.
Matthew Gatehouse, Head of Policy and Governance.
And up at the back there.
Leslie Russell, Senior Accountant for Treasury and Fixed Assets. Yeah, I had to think then. What am I today?
Mark Howcroft, Assistant Head of Finance.
Terry Lewis, Audit Manager with the Wales Audit Office.
Thank you, everyone. Declarations of interest, I'm happy to take those as we go along, unless somebody wants to speak up now. Public open forum, I'm not seeing any members of the public present, so we'll move on. I'm now going to change the agenda order slightly. I'm going to bring forward item 10 to note the action list from 13th of September 2018. As you'll all be aware, there was a recommendation that we should put minutes at the end of these meetings rather than at the beginning. I think they wanted to get the bureaucratic procedures out of the way and get into the meat of the meeting as quickly as possible. But what I feel with the action list is we very often ask people to come along to our meeting to give us an answer to an outstanding query, and it then gives them an opportunity to get away if they want to. So I think as a general rule, I will take the I will want to be taking the action list at this stage. Now, I know you're all going to have to scroll right down to the end of your papers to find this, but if you happen to have one handy, we find that the first item on the action list was for Peter Davis and Andrew Wathen. It was officers to attend re-compliance with the Bribery Act. And it was actually intended that that they would attend this meeting. They would attend this meeting today. Are there any developments in that area, please?
Yeah, my response comes with an apology, I guess, in the first instance, and as discussed with the Chair earlier in this week, very much had been the intention to bring an update, a substantive update, into the Audit Committee today. It's simply as a result of some of the extreme capacity issues that we've had at our end that has prevented us from doing so. We made a firm commitment to the Chair that we will look to bring that substantive update into the next meeting. It does require efforts on both myself and Andrew Wathen, Chief Internal Auditor, to work with some of our other senior colleagues significantly within HR and in procurement to ensure that we have embraced and incorporated satisfactorily recommendations that have been made by internal audit in their recent internal audit follow-up report on compliance with the Anti-Bribery Act. I'm satisfied in terms of, I guess, some of the intent that we have in place at the moment to address some of the weaknesses that were identified by internal audit. But what I want to make sure in bringing the update to you at the next meeting is that we've been able to bring some sort of concrete evidence behind that, and obviously to bring to provide Audit Committee with the necessary reassurance that arrangements are either are in place or are being put in place.
Thank you very much for that. If nobody wants to ask any further questions about that, I have noted that this has been on the agenda for a while now, so I will be very pleased to see it dealt with when we next get together. I'll move on then to the next action point, which was actually really for the Welsh Audit Office. Because of the agenda item we'd been looking at, we were asking whether there was anything available. It was looking at the school budget deficits and surpluses and how that compared with other schools across Wales, I guess. Do you have anything on that, Mr. Lewis?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it came up arising out of the presentation of the accounts. I think in terms of the accounts themselves, just to clarify, we were happy that there was a true fair view within the accounts of the balances as they stood. That wasn't the issue. It was in relation to the individual balances at schools, and some of the schools have gone into deficit. That can be a very emotive topic because, you know, it's all around funding and policy decisions for schools. But we did do some work following that meeting, looking across Wales at the balances of individual schools. And that information is publicly available within all the individual schools' accounts. And it's very variable. You know, the majority of schools are in surplus, but there are a proportion that are in deficit, and that's replicated right throughout the authorities in Wales, if you like. There are some various sort of comparatives that have been done at various forums around, you know, the level of balances and how they compare. One thing that did come out of that was in terms of Monmouthshire, the overall level of balance in terms of the total spend on schools is relatively low in comparison to other authorities. So it's at the lower end of that. But apart from that, it's very difficult to draw conclusions across the whole of Wales and different sizes of authorities, different levels of funding. As I say, the majority of schools are in surplus, but there are quite a number in deficit. In terms of Monmouthshire itself, it wasn't an issue for us as part of the audits in terms of the individual schools that are in deficit, because we felt that that was something that the council was well aware of. They were taking action, working closely with the schools and the relevant governors to bring things back under control. And that wasn't an immediate thing. That was probably a sort of medium-term proposal going forward. So, like I say, there is information out there, but it's very variable and it's difficult to draw an overall conclusion. It would be easy to get all the sets of accounts of each of the authorities and map it all, but I'm not sure what that would actually show, whether that would assist in this respect at all, because, like I say, it's variable right across Wales. Monmouthshire is not really an outlier in terms of having schools in deficit, apart from the fact that the overall level seems to be relatively low. So I hope that sort of helps in some way. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Murphy.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And yeah, I appreciate the problems that Terry and his team have had on that. I think we've probably got most of that information in-house anyway in the education section. The schools that we've got in deficit have all got very actively managed recovery plans. I had a meeting with Councillor John last week before at Monmouth. We got another one scheduled for King Henry and Abergavenny now, where we're monitoring the progress that they're making towards those plans. It's interesting to note that the leader of Neath Port Talbot Council has written out to Assembly members and to Welsh Government this week saying how badly off they're finding themselves, and the fact that they've got schools in increasing deficits and they're no longer able to maintain the level of funding. Actually, compared to the level of funding that we get as an authority, we do spend a fairly large proportion of that on schools, and if you do a comparison across, we're actually further up that league table than if you exclude the amount of overall funding. So yeah, we're doing a lot about it, and Terry is absolutely right. There's a lot of schools all over Wales that are very much in deficit, and some of them in for figures vastly in excess of the ones that we've got.
Thank you. Councillor Eason.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's somewhat a supplementary to Councillor Murphy's. The question is there any correlation between school deficits, overall school deficits as opposed to individual schools, across the 22 authorities in Wales in relation to the settlement grant they get from the Welsh Government? And what proportion of each council's commitment to schools varies across Wales? Did you have any information on that?
Is there anything like that available, Terry?
Yeah, I didn't go that far. It is quite complex. Something that could be done. There's probably some information available somewhere that you could probably tap into, but certainly something that I didn't go that far as part of the work that we did.
Mr. Howcroft.
Yeah, just providing a bit of context, really. I mean, the settlement from Welsh Government is unhypothecated in nature, so if you ask them about the level of resourcing going into schools, they would say that's a matter for local authorities to agree upon. Where I've previously done this analysis, and members may recall that I, every 2 years, look to do a unit cost exercise that looks at our cost of service against various activity metrics. In terms of the investment in funding for a school child, when I looked across Wales from a primary perspective, we were actually 6th in the list of 22 authorities in terms of the amount of money that we put into primary schools. Conversely, in relation to secondary schools, we were 19th out of 22. That certainly explains, or might help explain, the pressure within the secondary school sector. But it doesn't really explain the extent of schools that are of a primary nature that are in deficit. So I'm not sure necessarily it is a product of the amount going into schools per pupil. I think one of the things that I concluded previously was that the money has to be sufficient, but actually the difference between a success or a weak school tends to be around the culture that the head teacher gets, rather than actually a pound-for-pound investment providing a pound-for-pound performance improvement.
Okay, can I take it then that we've dealt with this point, that we've got the information we need? All right, thank you very much, everyone, for your contributions. The next action point was about, coming from the review of reserves. I think the suggestion was that in a future report there would be from finance, there would be some information about whether they'd identified a training need in regard to the understanding of reserves. Have you got anything on that, Mark?
Yeah, just to remind members, the discussion that we had last time we had a reserves report was that traditionally I report the extent of movement in particular reserves. What you found was that it would be more helpful if we actually understood what the actual decisions were that underpinned those movements, so that you could actually take a view on that. So what I agreed was that rather than give you the summary movements, I'd actually in future reports actually capture the extent of the approval that members have given, so that they better understood what the consequences were.
I'm sure that information will be welcome. Okay, so if there's nothing else on that, another training need, I think, is about whether we should have refresher training for select committee members on scrutiny. Now, the scrutiny manager doesn't come to this committee. That's Hazel Eilert, I believe. But is there any information on training for scrutiny committee members? Yeah.
Yes, Chair. I spoke to Hazel and mentioned the action, and she explained about the training that has been in place, but she said that she's due to come to Audit Committee for a scrutiny service plan, and so she's asked for a slot either December or January, and she'll address all that action then.
I'm sure that will be useful. Did you want to add anything, Matthew?
No, Chair, I think that covers it.
Yeah, okay. No, we've got that done. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Okay, so I'll move back to the agenda in its original order. First item we've got is CPR exemptions, the 6-monthly update. This was in the supplementary information provided. I'm going to ask Mr. Wathen to introduce the report, please.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Apologies for the delay in getting this out to you members. As the Chairman said, this is normally the 6-monthly update. but for some reason I've skipped a report, and it's now the 12-month update. So there's 2 sets of information for members which are included in the report. And this relates to the CPR exemption process which we have in place. So in terms of procurement, we have a recognised and approved process for contract procedure rules, where officers must comply with in order to undertake their procurements within their service areas. This exemption process is something that the audit team monitors and collates the information. The intention is that operational managers request an exemption form from us, then we can log it, then we can record the details, and they should get appropriate authorization from their heads of service and then return the form to us, so then we can update the log, ensure that it's been authorised correctly, and then report into Audit Committee and identify any issues or concerns. So for the periods covered, which are June 2017 to October 2017, in terms of a 6-month slot, and a November 17 to a May 2018, we've had a number of exemption requests. And the first period, there were 24 requests. 13 were not returned to the internal audit team, but 8 of those related to social services and commissioning, and they requested the exemption as a backstop, really, in terms of a process that they were thinking about going through, and subsequently didn't feel that it was appropriate for them to actually seek an exemption. So all of the other 11 return forms were appropriately authorised, which is reassuring. What I haven't done, Chairman, is to chase up those who have not replied yet. As Pete alluded to previously, because of the workload I've been involved with over the last few months, I have managed to do that, but I can give members assurance that I'll make sure that we chase that up and report back into next Audit Committee. For the second period, November 17 to May 18, there were 13 requests for exemptions, 4 of which have not been returned to internal audit. And one of the 13 is no longer required. So that's a bit of an overview of where we are, members. In total, since we've been recording this information over the last 7 years, we've had 259 requests for exemptions. And then on Appendix 2, there are some detailed individual requests which correspond to the exemption form requested. So as you can see, there's some have been documented, some have not been returned to us. So all that information is in the detail of the report. In the past, Chairman, we've invited in operational managers to justify why they felt there was a need for an exemption, and members have challenged them in due course. And as the members can see, I'm not exempt from this process. I've requested 2 exemptions. It's been recorded and documented, and I've had to seek appropriate authorization as well. When I'm in that position, I get the audit manager to document the record. Dave Walton, so I'm not involved in the process. But I'm happy to take any questions, Sharon.
Right, I'll just look at the recommendations that we're considering. Just to remind us, the recommendation 2.1 is that the Audit Committee accepts and acknowledges the justifications for exemptions provided by operational officers. I'm not actually sure that we know what those justifications are, so I might come back to that later. And then it goes on to say, if the justification is not accepted, consideration should be given to calling in the respective operational officers and their respective head of services to further account for the reasons why they could not comply with the Council's contract procedure rules at the time of procurement. And also, I think important that the Audit Committee receive an updated report in 6 months' time to include any further responses obtained by the Chief Internal Auditor. So I'm going to throw it open to comments and observations now. Councillor Higginson.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And yeah, I go along with everything there, but we need to ensure that these, that we get the appropriate responses as and when they are asked for. it'd be interesting to see what happens now in 6 months' time, you know, as to what happened with the total of the expected responses in that time. But there should be a response at some time. No one at any point should avoid making the response.
Thank you. Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I appreciate that Andrew's chasing it up, and I know that there's an awful lot of work going on with regards to procurement and sharpening up rules at the moment. I just wonder if some pressure can be put on senior management in the meantime, so perhaps Andrew hasn't got to chase it up in the way he was saying. You know, senior managers should know that they should send them back. And I think even in terms of the ones that weren't required by the social services teams, you know, they could send them back and say that we don't need this anymore, so people are not wasting time chasing around. I know that Peter Davis is currently pushing people along that. I don't know whether he wants to add anything with regards to SMTs.
Well, Mr. Watson had a point to make.
If I just cover this off first, yeah. Thanks, Councillor. And in response to that, we've now got a slot on the management induction programme from internal audit, so we can make sure that managers are aware of the processes which they need to follow. And we've also prepared some crib notes, which we're going to send in through to SLT for them to discuss and disseminate.
Yeah, I guess just as an acting member of SLT, helpful to receive that, and obviously what I can look to reinforce with SLT, coming back to the point that members made, is around the importance of the process. Obviously there'll be awareness through induction, as Andrew's just touched on. We need to reinforce the process back with chief officers, and such that they can similarly take that message down through into their respective management teams. And clearly, and it's not satisfactory at the moment in terms of forms being requested and then not being returned. I mean, that opens us up into two situations. One where I guess managers have come to a point of actually going through an appropriate and proper procurement route that doesn't require an exemption. And if so, I guess the basic courtesy in some respects of that loop being closed and internal audit being provided that update and information. Clearly, the second aspect of it is where an exemption, the intended route has been taken, and for which I guess an exemption should have been requested, and in fact that paperwork hasn't been completed. And clearly, if that is the case, then obviously the picture that's in front of you is a slightly incomplete one. And clearly, and again, we need to make sure that we close that loop. I think whilst I've just got the opportunity of having the mic, if I may, Chair, I just want to touch on, I guess, a point that was, I think, both touched on by yourself and Councillor Murphy, which is one around the justification. And I guess, you know, I think you're going to possibly ask that question in a slightly different vein in a minute. But from my perspective, and in always wanting to make sure that the processes that we have in place are robust, but also appropriate, I do want to make sure, in terms of the ongoing work that we're doing with procurement, allied to and linked to the revised procurement strategy, which came through Cabinet in July, I want to make sure that, you know, from a process and compliance perspective, we are as strong as we need to be. So I think one of the slightly inherent weaknesses that I see in the process, and from my perspective, is that procurement, and okay, we don't have a huge procurement team, as many of you might know. Our dedicated and core procurement team is made up of 2 officers. We have some wider specialisms in and around the business. But in terms of, I guess, the 2 individuals who are almost singularly responsible for that compliance aspect, there's a lot put upon them at the moment, and clearly, as discussed in the Chamber recently, I'll be looking to bring forward some proposals to actually bolster some of the immediate resource and capacity needed to take forward the procurement strategy. But I do need to recognise, coming back to this point around exemptions, that procurement should be having a clear role here in the process, such that I do appreciate that the forms as they are currently produced, they are produced by service officers managers. There is obviously a need for sign-off there by the respective management that they are comfortable with the reason that is being provided, and that makes its way then into internal audit. Internal audit, you know, they have some broad understanding, but they themselves are not procurement specialists. So, you know, what I need to make sure that procurement and, you know, the limited procurement specialism that we have, that they do have a role to play in the process and make sure that the reason that is being provided in by management is a satisfactory one. Now, if it isn't, then clearly there needs to be a challenge in that process. And I personally feel that needs to be made by procurement officers in the main. And hopefully that will look to make sure that exemptions that are coming through are for good and sound reasons. But it also offers a second benefit to me, and that is one around the importance of insight, because if there are patterns of exemptions that are taking place, then clearly there are some lessons to be learned, and it shouldn't be a case sometimes where we're getting, for example, towards the end of a contract duration, and the proper plans have not been put in place to obviously go out to tender, and an exemption is being, for example, asked for a 6-month extension. Well, really, you know, there should have been better planning put in place there, and managers should have been on top of that, and they should have been making the necessary arrangements. What I need my procurement team to be doing is actually getting in early, learning some of these lessons, and working with some of those service managers to make sure that, you know, we're addressing this going forward. And then hopefully, you know, we're always going to have situations where we're going to have exemptions. We are. That's the reason why there is an exemption route within our contract procedure rules. But clearly that should be only for good reason.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Councillor Easton.
Thank you, Chair. This matter of procurement or extensions of exemptions, etc., has been a matter which has come to this committee on numerous occasions, and it doesn't seem to go away. If you look at the report today, there are a couple of names on there which have been there before. I'm not going to mention names, but I think we've got to be cognizant of the fact that there's some officers are not really doing what they ought to be doing. And there's one particular one in here where there were 6 or 7 non-compliances, which to me should be a simple answer to get the compliance recorded. So I ask the thin air as to how many more times have we got to have this matter brought before Audit Committee on non-exemptions. Has a message got through, really? I understand what Mr Davis is saying, but it doesn't seem to go away. We've had officers in here, we've illustrated exactly what we require of them, but it seems as though it's, in a lot of cases, going on to deaf ears. What confidence can we have of this committee that what Mr Davis is saying will be put into practice?
Well, I think Mr Davis has already given you a presentation on that very topic. I thought that the list of unresolved or non-return forms was longer and broader than we've seen before. So much to the extent that I did wonder whether there was something structural going on in there. And also finding it would be difficult for the committee to focus on any particular area and say, you know, come on, tell us what's happening in X, Y, and Z. I think if there were to be a follow-up to this list of forms that haven't been returned, and we could see to some of the where some of the queries really lie, then we could focus a bit more on it at a future event. So unless the committee feels rather differently, I would really like to turn this back to Mr Wathard and his team to come back at a future date and tell us how many of these they've been able to follow up. Councillor Easton.
Yeah, furthermore, Chair, I think that the whole system must be looked at from root and branch. Is the system fit for purpose? Are we expecting some authorisations we don't need? Do we need to have all these? Is the system fit for purpose at the moment?
Chair, I think that in response to your question, I'm quite happy to chase up the people who haven't responded and report back in December. And what we'll also do for Audit Committee is to identify some themes and to identify the main culprits in terms of the names that will keep cropping up. in a summary format, so it might be easy for you to come to some conclusions then, if members are happy for me to do that. In terms of being fit for purpose, I think it is, but we can always review it. We're always looking to improve it, and if anybody's got any suggestions, we'll certainly take those on board.
We got the one in here where there are 7 exemptions for the same sort of thing. It's to do with social care. Perhaps Peter go away and Peter go away and look at whether that was really necessary to be exempted. There's 7 of them in there about social care.
It did look like there might be a single answer to cover that range. So I'd be eager to see what comes back. Yes.
Yeah, Chair, I'll certainly follow that one up. But from memory,
I think you need to turn your microphone on.
Thanks, Chair. I'll certainly follow that up. But from memory, the manager concerned put in for an exemption just in case they needed to go down a particular route. So it was kind of belt and braces process, really. And in the end, it was felt that they didn't need to get an exemption. But you're right, they didn't come back to me and tell me they didn't need an exemption. So we just need to close that gap.
Thanks for that. Okay, well, if there are no further comments from members, I'll just make one observation that the recommendation 1, that we acknowledge the justifications for the exemptions provided. Yes, we are given reasons for exemptions. They're very pithy notes, really. I suppose the more that we have issues with particular contracts, the more we want to know what the reasons were for. So I think if more information could be available on the individual projects, I think that might be helpful.
Okay, thanks, Chairman. Point taken. We do try and put that information on from the forms we receive. So there's a detailed comment as to why they want the exemption on the left-hand side, and there should be a reason for exemption on the right-hand side. But we're reliant on the service managers filling in the forms appropriately with the amount of detail which will enable me to furnish the log to report back into Audit Committee. So we can certainly beef that up when we discuss with SLT and roll it out to service managers.
If you could, but it also seems to me that whether we're satisfied with the justifications given will be dependent on which ones we want to follow up and which further questions we want to ask of the officers. So it's on us, really, as much as anything. Yes, Councillor
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, you talk about the recommendation. I move the recommendation, but 2.2 is quite clear, you know, as to what the process is. And, you know, as I say, I move in the recommendations, and it's just quite distinct as to what processes should be followed. So, you know, the recommendations are quite correct. You know,
Right, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. I intend to move on then, if that's all right with everyone. The next item on the agenda is the mid-year Treasury report, which we have as authors Leslie Russell and Jonathan Davis. Would you like to introduce the report, please? Perhaps I should just look at the recommendations in the paper so that we know the context of this. That members review the Treasury management activities in the first half of 2018-19 using this report and discuss with officers any changes to the process that should be considered for incorporation into the 2019-20 Treasury Management Strategy Statement, and to agree and recommend that the Council amends the wordings in Table 2 of the 2018-19 Treasury Management Strategy, approved investment counterparties and limits, so that pooled funds can be used to increase investment income, as in point 314 in the paper. So over to you, Mark and Leslie.
Chair and councillors, you've read through the report, I hope. There's a few areas that I just wanted to highlight for you before you table any questions. In the report, it states that the Prudential Code has recently been updated. We've, since the last time I was here, SIPFA, through training events and a checklist, have actually sort of given a bit more information about what they actually want on the back of that change of code. And one of the key things there is a capital strategy. I think Mark is preparing a report currently which gives a little bit more background on what will be in the capital strategy, and then that will be presented early in the new year for your approval. I know one of the figures that often attracts attention is the actual borrowing figure that the authority has undertaken during the 6 months. During the 6 months, gross borrowing has increased by 32 million to 161 million. Investments have increased by 4 million to 21 million. So net borrowing has increased by 28 million to 140 million. This does seem like quite a large jump. Some of this was forecast in the capital MTFP, but not all of it. 13 million was in the original MTFP for 2018-19 due to 21st Century Schools, the Monmouth Leisure Centre, the Abergavenny Hub, J Block, and just normal infrastructure schemes. Additional borrowing has been approved during the year for the property investment programme, which you know that Castlegate has been purchased for 8.5 million approximately, and the city deal payments were increased since the MTFP was written. So for those reasons, the total borrowing budget for 18-19 has gone up to 30 million. Some of the increase in the actual borrowing opposed to the budgeted borrowing relates to timing of events in the year. For example, most of the Monmouth comprehensive spend has been in the early part of the year, but some of the grants and capital receipts that we are expecting are in the later part of the year. So I'm expecting that the borrowing will not increase and possibly could decrease by year end. The second recommendation is to make a small amendment to the Treasury strategy. When this was written, the intention was that the authority could make use of pooled funds to a small extent, up to 4 million. But the choice of wording wasn't quite accurate. So when we asked for the required approval of our Treasury advisors to go ahead with this, they said that they couldn't actually approve it based on the wording. And so in 3.14, there's a slight change to the wording that they've recommended. The wording actually alluded to pooled funds being of high credit worthiness, which is not actually appropriate for pooled funds. So they've asked us to change the wording to an appropriate investment. Just looking for it now. To a suitable investment which is being managed in a way which is consistent with the objectives of the fund. So most of the pooled funds do have an objective, whether it's a fixed objective, a certain amount of percentage return, or whether it's linked to some other indicator. So the funds that Arling Close recommend to us, they have actually investigated quite thoroughly. They meet regularly with fund managers and look at the trends and the sort of background information behind the funds. So all the funds in their recommended list, they believe would be appropriate for us. So I'm hoping that you'll accept that recommendation so that I can consult with other members of the more senior members of the Treasury team to go on and actually select one of those pooled funds which is most appropriate for us. Is there any questions? Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Leslie. Yes. Yeah. Well, let me just let me just see if I can manage this debate. I think Councillor Easton had his hand up first. So I'm now going to throw it open to questions and observations. No, Councillor Easton, you go first.
Thank you. You're showing 160 million pounds of debt, 45 million pounds of investment, and 20 million pounds in investment. 45 million pounds of investment properties and 20 million pounds in investment. Is the return on those two investments, 45 and 20 million, 45 and 20 million, 65 million, greater than what you're paying out in debt, 361 million pounds we have as debt?
I'm not sure I recognise the figures that you quote in terms of investments, but you'll remember that the commercial investments that came via full council for consideration, one of the primary requirements for that was that officers in volunteering proposals, the rental or the return that they got from that investment, whether it be by renting it out to someone else or the annual income that derives from it, has to be more than the borrowing costs associated with it. So in the situations where it doesn't return an amount, those would be investments that would fail that test of reasonableness, and the investment committee wouldn't take those forward.
Can I just add to that? So the answer is yes for you. Can I just add, I think the 45 million that you've mentioned are the existing investment properties that we've had for a long time. So these aren't anything in any sort of recent years that we've actually specifically invested in. We may even, acquired them from the days of the Gwent Authority or the old Monmouthshire Borough Council and that sort of thing.
But they are returning a reasonable return, in other words.
They are, but they're historic in nature. There'll be things like industrial units and business park arrangements that we have an interest in, that obviously at the time we would have had as an asset portfolio. But Leslie's right in confirming that it doesn't meet the same test as the more recent approval that you've given around commercial property.
You've got 20 million pounds in investments themselves. That would, I presume, return better than what you're doing on the 161 million pounds. Taking the two off is equal to 90 million pounds, isn't it?
The debt figure that you quoted, that's the amount of money that this authority has borrowed and not yet repaid over the fullness of time. So that money has been used to finance capital projects for the life of the authority, and that borrowing is being sort of repaid as each individual borrowing item comes up for maturity. So that doesn't relate directly to investments. The only way borrowing and investments relate directly is where we specifically take out borrowing because we want to do an investment. So in the case of Castlegate, we took out £8.5 million of borrowing this year to enable that investment to go ahead. And as Mark mentioned, the costs of borrowing have to be met first before any surplus is then contributed back to the authority as income.
So to be clear then, in my mind, simple mathematics, we've got those investments, 45 and 20, which is 65 million pounds. They offset any payments we're making on the 161 million pounds, making it equivalent to really an actual debt.
No, that's not correct. They don't.
Right.
The debt is typically probably 3.5% to 4% average for the whole portfolio. I'm not exactly sure of how to quantify the returns on the old investment properties. I think they are relatively low, but the reason that I believe they're not being sort of turned around into more profitable things is that the assets have a lot more worth than we could sell them for today. So it would be very short-sighted to sell something without development work. So you probably know that the estates team are spending a lot of time developing a certain number of assets for sale, and that the sale value will be many times more than the original asset would have been worth. So, yeah.
If I could just provide a useful context to this. In our Treasury dealings, it is always more expensive to borrow than it is to invest surplus money. What we've tried to do in our Treasury policy in the past is to mitigate our costs of borrowing, not necessarily chase returns on investments. Because, for instance, a 25-year Commonly, if we take a loan out over 25 years, probably of the order of 3.5% in terms of what we pay as a cost. Investments-wise, through the money markets, through short-term investments with the bank, we're probably only getting 0.5% return on them. So it's far better to use your resources that you've got to avoid borrowing than it is necessary to chase that extra basis point in terms of an investment. But how it has an impact upon the recommendations is that you may remember that there's this thing called MiFID II, and we've given you a training session that describes our need to hold a certain investment balance to be regarded as a professional client rather than a retail client. So ordinarily, we would look to use our cash balances to avoid borrowing. But by definition, we have to keep £10 million worth of investments. Well, it makes little sense to keep investing that short-term and recurrently when we know that we can't realise it or use it to avoid borrowing, and actually we will get a better return on a pool fund that's more associated with a long or medium-term burn on investment rates than we would do constantly putting it in the bank overnight and trying to get 0.5%. You'll also appreciate that one of the problems that we have with investment is around the bail-in risk, and the fact that institutionalised lenders, of which we'd be regarded as one, if a bank goes insolvent overnight, the institutional investors bail that out before the government. So we don't get the same protection as your own personal bank accounts. That's why it's increasingly tricky for us to find appropriate places to invest these sums of money. And finding a place to invest £10 million and putting that all with one entity is probably imprudent. But actually applying it to a pooled fund where actually there's a mix of investments and a prudent portfolio, A, reduces our element of risk and bail-in, and B, actually safeguards a better return.
I think Councillor Murphy wanted to get in, but just before I do hand it over to Councillor Murphy, can you just tell us what MiFID stands for, please?
While you pass over to Councillor Murphy, I will Google what the acronym stands for. It's certainly Financial Investments Directive, but I can't remember what the MI stands for, so just bear with me.
Well, I thought it was the multiple index from memory, but I couldn't link it to anything else. So we're probably all wrong. I was trying to get back to pooled investments, Chair, which I think was Leslie's original question, as to whether we were happy with the change of the wording. And the other point is that we have done quite well with the Welsh Church Fund and the Monmouthshire School Endowment with regards to pooled investments. So moving over to stuff that's got the potential to make us more money, I think is a pretty good idea.
Our finance officers will know that I was asking about whether we'd moved away from the principle of security of investments, which we'd said was a basic strategic view, unlike the funds you mentioned, which I think had been looking to get higher returns on their balances. I'm reassured that the strategy being proposed is a prudent one. So I'm not at this particular stage going to say as chair that I don't think it's prudent, but I just wondered whether councillors just needed to be aware that these are investments in which your investment can go down as well as up, as they keep saying. Councillor Smith, did you have a question?
I was curious about the acronym.
Do you mean the markets in financial instruments?
Oh, right.
Okay, can you just turn your microphone on and say that, please?
The Markets in Financial Instruments Directive.
Again, Councillor Smith, can you put your microphone on?
Sorry, Chairman. Yes, wanted to. That made me curious. I found it very interesting, actually, this your report, and I thank you. I couldn't understand. Thank you for your explanation of the pool funding, because when I read, okay, change the terming and why, I couldn't understand in my mind what you were actually moving to. But I'm fine with that now. The appendix one I find is fascinating reading. The trouble being, Chairman, I find when I start something, by the time I've got to the end, I've forgotten what I was at the beginning. But I do thank the officers for giving me some explanations and a better understanding as to how the finances work. I feel a little more confident as a member.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Anything else? Yes, Councillor Strong.
Yes, just to go on to the pooled funding. Some years ago, us Grammar School Trust was transferred across to Roger Edwards Education Trust, I think. And the money that was transferred was about £900,000. That was invested in COIF, which I think is possibly one that Arlington would recommend. That has now increased over the 7 or 8 year period in value to about 1.3 million from 900,000. In addition to which, I think they've had a return of over £40,000 a year on the investment. So I think if you have a balanced portfolio, obviously you should make quite a bit of money.
Can I just sort of add one point there, sort of on the back of yours, Mr. Chair? The important consideration with pooled funds is that we need to commit over a 3 to 5 year period, because by the nature of the markets, the principal can go up or down. But if you're in for the long haul, if it dips a little, then it comes back up again. That doesn't cause you severe pain. And because we are committed to holding 10 million of investments for the foreseeable future, because we don't see any change in the MiFID rules, we are actually now in that situation, which we weren't a year ago, because a year ago we were looking at maximising internal borrowing and keeping our investments at a minimum. So that is the sort of the driver for the change.
Thank you. Councillor Higginson.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Councillor Murphy proposed the proposed acceptance of the amended wording in 3.14, and I'll second that, and I'm prepared to remove those recommendations as well from.
Councillor Smith, did you have anything else?
Yes, very briefly. Reference to the investments and looking more positively as to how we organise our finances, okay? There's the investment committee, and there's a reference in the report that we will get a report back sometime or other on how the investments are actually going forward. I mean, we've made a substantial one in the last few months, and last year there was another one. We're going to get a composite report sometime of how the investments are actually coming forward, the money situation.
I think that's a good question, if you could help with that.
Yeah, what's anticipated in the commercial investments strategy is that the decisions of the investment committee will be reported through the select route, probably economy and development in the first instance, given that portfolio, in terms of an explanation of what's been invested in the year, what returns it's deriving for the council, so that you can actually, so that the members of that select or scrutiny committee can assess the actions of the investment committee in managing those investments on a regular basis, because you'll appreciate that actually it's not a case of simply buying the investments and then sitting on them. There's active management got to be done behind those to assess whether the returns are reasonable and as predicted, and possibly some remedial action whereby it's potential to divest yourself of some of the assets in favour of providing headroom to buy others. So it's a far more active arrangement, but the reporting back is by nature a little bit tortuous, because normally we would expect to have such decisions approved by full council as a capital programme matter up front. The recognition around the confidentiality of some of these agreements and the effective price means that actually you were accepting of the situation of providing a £50 million portfolio and provided discretion to the investment committee to look at it in the first instance, and then you will get your feedback, as I said, through the normal scrutiny process, and I anticipate that being economy and development, although there is an argument to relate it very much to Treasury and it could come to Audit Committee. I'm not sure that any final decision's been made on that yet.
Could I ask, Chairman, when would you expect to sort of put a first report forward in that form?
Over to you, Mr. Hoecroft.
As a discipline, I would hope to do it annually, and the sensible time to do it would seem to be in conjunction with the end of the financial year.
Well, thank you. Well, we have a proposal to accept the recommendations under seconder. Unless we feel there's a need to go to a vote on this, I don't normally think there is, we'll move on then. So thank you very much, everyone, for that. Yes, Mr. Hoecroft.
May I just acknowledge that actually one of the things I'm trying to do with some of my officers is to give them a better exposure towards members and understanding of where members' questions may come from. So I appreciate it can be quite a daunting experience sat in front of members on TV with a mic there. So I'd just like to thank Leslie for her presentation.
Yes, and thanks from me as well. The next item on the agenda then, agenda item 6, Internal Audit Progress Report for 2018 and 19. So I'll hand that one over to Mr. Wathen.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Hopefully members will be familiar with the report format of this report. This is one of the regular reports I bring to Audit Committee's attention on progress, and this is the 6-month update up to the September 30th, 2018. It's in 2 parts, as normal. Covers the opinions which we issue as part of our normal audit day-to-day business, and also the performance of the internal audit team. So for the first 6 months of 18-19, I'll go through the opinion work that we've issued to date, to the end of September. Of the 28 audit jobs which we've taken to draft report stage, 5 of those have been opinion related, 4 related to grant claim work. So we get involved with some assessment of claims that the authority gets funding for from external organisations. Of those grant claims which we've reviewed, 2 are unqualified, which is good, and 2 were qualified, there's some concerns which we report back. And we also get involved with the annual governance statement, which feeds into the financial statements. So of the 5 opinion-related reports which we've issued, all have been reasonable, none were limited assurance, but we are obviously working with audit jobs that are ongoing at the moment, and some of those may result in limited assurance, which we'll report back at the end of Q3, so sometime in January or February. But at the moment, there are no limited assurances which we've reported back to management. The definitions of the opinions are included in the appendix. With regards to finalisation work for 17-18, there were 24 reviews which we had at draft report stage at the end of the year. 17 have been finalised with various opinions, and others are in the process of being finalised as we speak. The team have also been involved in a number of special investigations during the year, which can be time-consuming and quite sensitive, and they inevitably will have an impact on our ability to complete the audit planned work. So in terms of the performance of the team, the key indicator is the amount of audit work which we've got to draft report stage at a certain period of time. And for the end of September, we've achieved 30% of the plan to draft against a target of 28%, and higher than where we were this time last year, which was 23%. So we're moving in a good direction. In terms of getting draft reports out, it's taken us 4 days to issue those draft reports and 17 days to issue final reports. That is something that we will work on as a management team within the audit section to make sure we're on top of that, to get our reports out on a timely basis after we've undertaken the audit work. If I can just refer members to the Appendix 1, that shows the individual jobs which we've issued, the status as whether they're draft or finalised, and the opinion which we've issued alongside those. In addition to the grant claim work we've identified, which was unqualified and qualified. And then moving on to the non-audit opinion work, which we've also been involved with, just to give members a reflection of other work that we've been involved with. In terms of performance of the team, That's shown as Appendix 3. And what I've done for members is to provide a year-on-year comparison, but also a quarter-by-quarter comparison to hopefully make it easy to read and to compare. And so I think we're moving in a positive direction, but we'll keep Audit Committee up to date with any progress. Happy to take any questions, Chairman.
Well, I thought that was an encouraging performance so far. We'll just note the recommendation that the committee note the audit opinions issued and that the committee note progress made by the section towards meeting the 18-19 operational plan and the section's performance indicators at the 6-month stage of the financial year. So I'm going to throw it open now to questions and observations. Councillor Eason.
Just, Chair, to declare an interest on P181917, Ysgol Finn. I'm a governor on this school. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions and observations? It's as I felt, it's an encouraging report. I didn't see anything I wanted to raise on there.
Yeah, I agree, Chair. It's nice to hear.
Yes, Councillor Smith.
Please, I've lost it. Just a curiosity, the Agri Improvement Scheme or whatever, has that concluded now, please? It was one of your audits. It came out as a qualified one. I've lost it now. And I just wanted to satisfy myself. Does the scheme continue or has it finished?
Thank you. The scheme is continuing. I think it's coming to its end stages at the moment. But we've been asked to audit it at various stages throughout its life. I think there might be 1 or 2 stages left for us to audit.
Thank you for that. Well, thank you for your update. And if there's no more comments and observations, I'm happy to move on to the next agenda item, which is the overview of performance management arrangements. And I'm going to ask Richard Jones to introduce the paper, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Here to present to you the overview of our performance management arrangements, which is part of an annual update we bring to you appraising our arrangements. And it's to inform your role around assurance of effectiveness of the Council's performance arrangements. As a reminder, Appendix 3 contains the Council's full performance framework. This is the way we translate our purpose of building sustainable and resilient communities into real and tangible action. And the Appendix 1 provides the appraisal of the main constituent parts of our performance framework, those being our wellbeing objectives and our improvement objectives, our service business planning process, our performance data information we use to evaluate our effectiveness, staff appraisal process, also known as check-in, check-out, our strategic risk assessment process, and where there's a little formatting issue, we've gone on the agenda with the strategic risk assessment pages, so apologies for that, but hopefully it's still fairly clear that should relate to the next page. When it left my screen, I assure you it was like that. I think it's just a PDF in issue. And the final part of arrangements is around self-evaluation. So each arrangement has been appraised. It gives you the purpose, the reason why we undertake that arrangement, provides an evaluation score based on our evaluation framework of level 1 to level 6, and all the arrangements are either level 3 adequate or level 4 good as we've assessed them. And it provides you then with further information about why you've appraised it with that score, and then gives you an indication of future actions we're looking to take to improve or develop further our arrangements. And to inform that, we've used a wide variety of evidence. We've used feedback from external audit reports, particularly Wales Audit Office Performance Audit Work Programme reports. We've used feedback from internal audit work and internal audit reports as well as our own understanding and self-reflection of our arrangements we've learned as we implement them. One other thing just to highlight in Appendix 2, which is in addition to the usual report I bring you. As part of the corporate plan commitment, Cabinet agreed for a report to come to you looking at the Council's strategic planning framework. So to supplement that, to meet that recommendation, we've also included an appendix to an appraisal around the council's effectiveness, its decision-making and policy-making arrangements as well. So that give you the background. Hopefully it's familiar. It's a regular annual report. Happy to take any questions on the recommendation.
Thank you. I'll just note the recommendation that members use the update provided to inform their understanding of the effectiveness of the operation of the authority's performance management arrangements and identify any areas where they feel action needs to be taken or further information provided. So I'll just throw it open to questions and observations. Councillor Higgins.
Yeah, just one, Chairman, if I may, on staff appraisal. And he says not all staff are having annual appraisals. Is there, you know, that's a statement in there. So what is the position in that? Are you getting that position, sorry, when everyone will be appraised?
That feedback's come from a Wales Audit Office follow-up review, which concluded that not all staff are an appraisal. So I'll come on to in the next report as well, and there's links between the next report around proposals for improvement, what we're doing to make sure that we are accurately recording that all staff are having appraisals. What the report updates you on is that we recognised at that time there was potentially issues with the recording system that was in place. So HR colleagues have been working on strengthening that recording system so we can assure ourselves that all staff are having appraisals. As you can see, there's still further work ongoing to make sure that that recording system is being populated accurately by our staff, and then we can actually come to you with assurance around the numbers around that. And I know they're looking at alternative ways as well of capturing that information using things like email voting buttons as well. So there's further work ongoing to make sure, and obviously across 3,500, 4,000 staff, there's quite a system there to work to make sure that everyone is recording that accurately and consistently.
Thank you. Any more questions and observations? Yes, Councillor.
I don't know if we're on the same one, Jim. The staff appraisal, the check-in, check-out, I just put a little note alongside. What is the percentage actually being achieved at the moment? Because this has been ongoing for some time, and it would seem a very easy thing to do.
Yeah, and as you sort of just alluded, that's the bit of the system they're working on to make sure they can accurately report on the numbers being completed. I say they know they're looking at alternative arrangement using voting buttons, and I can certainly ask if there's any update at the moment so that they can give you an accurate update on where that is. But I know there's further work ongoing around that to make sure that that is accurate, but I can certainly ask and get that.
So are you saying that you could provide a percentage figure separately to members?
I can check to see if that is in place to be able to give that update.
Okay.
And
Well, that's an action for the committee anyway.
Yes, Chairman, that goes back to sort of 2015 and 16. Would you expect progress?
Yeah.
Right, thank you. Yes, Mr. Davis.
Just for the minutes, that action probably needs to reside with me rather than Richard. Just in terms of my portfolio, people services residing within it. So if Richard doesn't mind, then I'm sure he won't. I will take that action away and provide a response back into the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. A couple of observations from the chair, if I may. I appreciate each section in this report contains a reasoned discussion of our current and future performance. But would you like to say whether you're satisfied with the overall level? I noticed most of the reports were adequate, which is not unsatisfactory, of course, and there were some goods. But is there an ongoing strategy to raise these levels?
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair. I say we've used a wide variety of evidence to inform our appraisal, and we want to give a balanced response to members in terms of where we are with our arrangements. The actions hopefully give you an understanding at the end of each section, the plans in place to strengthen, further improve or develop our arrangements. Maybe if I pick up some of those adequates and give you a brief explanation sort of overall where we feel we are with those arrangements. So in terms of the adequate, this around service planning, we've implemented a new framework for service business planning from April this year that aligns to the delivery of the corporate plan, and that includes some updates in terms of services now planning over a 3-year period and some revisions in terms of our principles. We've done an appraisal of the plans that have been put in place already to look at the quality of them and completeness and compliance with those principles, and we fed that back to managers for them to look to improve and embed those within them. So at this stage of implementation of that new framework, we feel we've got adequate arrangements with a plan to look to strengthen those, and we've got 40+ business plans in place. Not all of them were as robust as they could be, so we're looking at working with officers to strengthen those where we can. In terms of picking up a couple of the others that are adequate, our risk management arrangements that are flagged as adequate. We've got again, established strategic risk management process in place, and indeed the committee receives annually the actual strategic risk register to inform you of the strategic risk currently facing the council. We've had some feedback from an internal audit report around how we can strengthen our strategic risk management arrangements, and we're looking at implementing those actions in liaison with them. And again, we've had some feedback from recent Wales Audit Office report that we could, again, further strengthen our risk management arrangements. So we've got a plan in place to do so, and we feel based on that those were best assessed as adequate at this stage. So that gives you a bit of an understanding about some of the adequates, and the paper sets out some of the key future actions we're taking.
Thank you. That's helpful. Councillor Woodhouse.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at 3.5, this appears to be an annual report to audit. Would it be helpful to have previous years' outcomes, if that's the right word, put as a little graph on there for us to see where we're actually at in the process? I think that's what we've just been discussing regarding where we've been and where we're going. And we can measure how our current performance is. If we could.
And certainly take that on board for the next report, Chair. And just to obviously reiterate that we do try and also build on the update that was provided previously to make sure we're continuing to give you a consistent picture. But I think that would be a helpful suggestion for the next report.
Thank you. Another comment from the Chair, really. Is there any mechanism by which the Audit Committee receives reports on whether the authority is achieving its performance indicators, either in terms of an exception report of things not being met or an overall report? I don't personally recall seeing such a report. The issue actually came up during the safeguarding review. Certainly in terms of the interview I experienced as part of the safeguarding review, as to whether the audit committee was aware of a specific indicator not being met. I know you've got a link to the safeguarding review in your next paper, so specifically on that, people can follow that up there. But do you have any thoughts on what I've just said?
Thank you for that, Chair. I think it's probably just worth reflecting on the role of Audit Committee and also the role of Select Committees in scrutinising performance as well. So this report and the reports we bring you help you understand your role around understanding the effectiveness of the Council's performance management arrangements. And as those of you on Select Committees will know, and I'm sure everyone's aware, obviously Select Committees scrutinise the Council's actual performance and receive a range of reports related to the Council's performance. I also understand that obviously in terms of looking at arrangements, the outcome of which is some of our performance via performance indicators. But at the same time also there's a range of other factors that will affect our performance, which through that Select Committee lens of scrutiny, you delve into a lot more detail to understand the various factors that can affect it. Certainly there is a wide variety of performance information already available to members. A couple of things just to highlight. We produce an annual report of the Council's performance, and that's in line with local government measure legislation and also Future Generations Act legislation. Councillors will be aware that was approved at Council in September and recently published a week or so ago, and that gives you an annual evaluation of our performance. The service business planning process I mentioned earlier, that's on the hub, and that updates quarterly in terms of services activity and progress on performance. The next performance report that's coming out in terms of the corporate plan, there's a 6-month progress report going to Cabinet on a corporate plan. We'll look at progress against that 5-year plan in 2018-19, against the commitments of the 5 goals of the Council at that corporate level. So there is information available, and I'm certainly willing to make sure that the Audit Committee aware of that next report coming out in the 6-month report that will go to Cabinet and obviously be on the public meeting agenda paper as well. I think probably in future it's just about we can be clear about the role between Audit Committee and Select Committee and continue to consider how we make sure that it's suitably cited and the links between the two are working effectively.
Yeah, I don't think there's a particular problem if a paper is being prepared for another committee or for full council that it might not be put on our agenda so that we can we could just consider it and ask any questions. And I feel that if there was something about the authority's performance that we could look at, it might be useful work for the committee as a part of our general remit for governance. Mr. Gatehouse, you want to contribute?
Yeah, Chair, if I just come in on that, one of the things I absolutely understand the need to get as much information as possible to inform the judgments you make as a committee. One of the things we're trying to ensure with our process is that reports aren't sort of double-handled and we don't have multiple committees looking at the same item. I think the sorts of information that are received when they're looked at by scrutiny committees, if you look at, say, a performance indicator which might be looking at the quality of adult social care, in order to get a full response and understanding of that picture, those select committees often may have to talk to, say, Eve Parkinson as Head of Integrated Services or Julie Boothroyd. If you were to receive those reports in their entirety and to explore the detail in the same way select committees do, you would, in some instances, be duplicating that role of select committee. And as officers, we need to bring more people into the audit committee. So I think it's absolutely right that you have access to the information. Whether we would be able to make arrangements for that to be examined in the same detail that you can in select committee, I'm less sure, because I think you'd get into the situation where you have a slight overlap of roles with select.
Councillors councillors will know that your embodiment in the various select committees and so on gives you a much wider appreciation of what's going on within the authority than I have as the lay member of this committee and chair of this committee. Whether there's a need for additional need for information along the lines that I've mentioned, I think would be the crucial issue here would be what you thought about it. You know, if you think you're cited on the council's performance, and of course, any of you could raise a question or a motion in this committee asking about something which was of concern to you, then I'm happy to go along with that. So does anyone have any views? Yes, Councillor Smith.
Yeah. I'm a long-standing member, Chairman, so I've got a background with the council. And I'm very fortunate, and I live conveniently, so that I'm able to sit, and I'm grateful to the chairman of the various select committees and scrutiny committees that I can sit and observe. And I feel this gives me an overview of what the council is doing. I feel for many members, and possibly yourself, you have a very, not disjointed or poor view, but I certainly appreciate the opportunity to sit and listen to other discussions. It gives me a view and a feeling of what the council is actually at and about, which I feel perhaps many members don't have, and I can understand your view, Chairman.
Councillor Maffey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it's up to us to take an overview and to challenge where we see appropriate, but it's not up to us to actually scrutinise. That's what the select committees do.
Any more contributions along those lines? Well, perhaps if I could just say I floated the idea now in the air, and if in future members of this committee have further concerns about it, perhaps you could raise it again, if that's satisfactory for everyone. So we're not, I think, asking for anything specific now.
Move the recommendations and as is.
Yes, thank you. Shall we do that and move on to the next item? All right, thank you very much. Next item on the agenda. Find it? Yes. Next item on the agenda is the progress report on Wales Audit Office proposals for improvement, which is for Richard Jones again, and we've also got Emma Davis as an author of the paper. So if you'd like to introduce this.
Yeah, me again. Apologies committee. And Emma Davis, my colleague, who's been with us now for 3 months, helped me pull the report together. She's on leave today, so I'm presenting it to you alone. So this is again a part of your regular 6-monthly update on the progress with Wales Audit Office proposals for improvement. They've been issued to the council. The report brings together all the proposals that have been issued as part of the performance audit work programme of Wales Audit Office. and as part of their work, they can make 4 levels of intervention. All those in front of you today are of the lower end of called proposals for improvement, which the Wales Audit Office expects us to act upon, and we determine the way in which we wish to address them. As I mentioned, it builds upon the last update you had as a committee, which is in March 2018. The proposals are grouped together under themes and headings. So the report contains proposals related to human resources, performance management, partnership and collaboration, governance, finance, information technology, information management, asset management, and children's safeguarding. So you can see it covers a range of the council's arrangements. Each of the proposals gives you the proposal that was actually issued, the Wales Audit Report in which that issue was raised, the current progress against that proposal the council has made, and then future actions that are being undertaken to address those proposals. Appendix 1 contains the proposals that we class as open, which is where we feel we've got further work to do in order to address them. And Appendix 2 contains the proposals that we have deemed as closed. This is where we feel we've taken adequate action to address that proposal and there's suitable evidence that it has been addressed, and we have closed it and it will be removed from future reports to the committee. Including the report, a recently issued reports from Wales Audit Office. You remember at your last meeting you had a report on overview and scrutiny arrangements from Wales Audit Office, and the management response has been translated into this proposal update now. And as the Chair just mentioned, the Children's Safeguarding Report was reported to Children and Young People Select Committee last month, along with the Council's management response. And that's now been built, the response to that has now been built into this report, so you can take an overview of the progress the Council is making in addressing the proposals that have been made in that report. Obviously, with those 2 being newly issued, there's been little progress since those were last reported to you. Also, just to draw out the judgment in there from the Wales Audit Office Annual Improvement Report, you'll receive that as a committee as well, but just to remind you, the conclusion of that this year, issued in August 2018, was that the Council's meeting its statutory requirements in relation to continuous improvement, and based on and limited to the work carried out by Wales Audit Office and relevant regulators, the Auditor General believes the Council is likely to comply with the requirements of local measure during 2018-19. And finally, just to highlight to you in Appendix 3, is national reports issued by Wales Audit Office. So these aren't issued directly just to Monmouthshire like the other reports. They're national reports issued across Wales, but nonetheless some of the issues with them may be relevant to some of our services. So we've consolidated the ones that have been issued in the last 6 months within Appendix 3 and given you a brief overview of the conclusion of that report and a link to the full report should you wish to look at it in more detail, and also give an understanding about who the responsible officer within the council is who's received that report, and we'll consider what parts of it are relevant to the council. And one of the specific recommendations in the report is for you to look at those and where you feel there may be a need to consider whether it needs to be referred on to other committees to look at in more detail. So the way you do that is through the consolidation of them in this report. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair, in line with the recommendations, particularly this report. Obviously, I'm putting together a range of information from different council services and different responsibility holders. If there's any specific questions that I can't answer, we'll try and get a response back to you.
Right, well, we have the recommendation that members consider the current position of proposals and future actions being taken to address them, seeking assurance that adequate progress is being made, and the members refer on any issues contained within national studies to other committees for consideration where they identify there are findings of particular relevance to the Council. So I'm just going to throw that open now for questions and observations, please. Councillor Murphy.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And there's one of the performance management arrangements recommendations here was regarding the medium-term financial plan. Just to let members know that there's a lot of work been going on by Richard and his team, Emma in particular, with regards to linking the corporate plan and the medium-term financial plan together with the current budget deliberations. In fact, there was an interim report given to the SLT Cabinet yesterday, and that work is going on. So we are very much linking the corporate plan with the medium-term financial plan and the current budget round. So that, you know, that particular one is being dealt with in some order.
Thank you. Councillor Eason.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's a correction, Richard, I think. Page 11 of your report, page 67 of the papers. It's clarity over the role of cabinet members when attending select committee meetings, which, according to this, is open. In other words, it needs to be addressed. The statement says, members of the council are entitled to attend any formal meeting of the council, its committees or subcommittees or the cabinet. Where they are not a member of that body, their attendance and right to speak is at the discretion of the chair. There's a contradiction in terms of the fact I think attendance shouldn't be in the second sentence or part of the second part of the whole sentence. Am I correct? Members of the council are entitled to attend any formal meeting of the council, its committees or subcommittees or the cabinet. Where they are not I think I should have been full stop there. Where they are not a member of the body, their attendance and right to speak is at the discretion of the chair. I understand that their right to speak is at the discretion of the chair, but not their attendance.
It's just a little bit redundant, I think. That if they have the right to attend, then
yeah, it's contradictory.
Their attendance isn't at the discretion of the chair. So.
No. But that changed before it goes into the constitution. Thank you.
Councillor Murphy.
As regards cabinet members, though, Chair, the attendance of a cabinet member is normally requested by the chair, so it's almost right. Well, as I've said before, any cabinet member is welcome to attend audit committee. I'm quite happy with that.
Just check that wording to make sure it matches back to what's in the appropriate code. And
okay, any other questions or observations?
I make one observation on the partnership and collaborative working proposals. I'm aware that things are happening north, Abergavenny anyway, but with regard to the area meetings, they are still at an early stage and need to be considered, please.
Okay, thank you. In that case, then, I suggest that we accept the recommendations and move on to the next agenda item, which is we've finally arrived at the minutes of the previous meeting. Does anyone have any comments or observations on the minutes of the previous meeting, please?
I do my usual move of acceptance, Chairman.
Does anyone have comments? Anyone have any comments or corrections they wish to make?
No corrections, Chair, but there was an item in there which needed picking up to with training, I think.
Can you elaborate?
I'm trying to find where it is now. I should have it ready, shouldn't I? But there's something in there which about training for the members, I think.
We did have a couple of items on training in the action points.
We can accept the minutes are correct. We can pick that up when I find it. All right.
Okay. So just need a seconder, I suppose, and
second, yeah.
Then we can accept the minutes. Yeah, thank you very much. We've already done the action list. The next item is the forward work programme. If we look through this, in fact, I think I'm going to take this together with the item on the date and time of the next meeting. Because if we look through this, we'll find that we don't have actually anything currently scheduled for December. Now, I don't know whether there are plans afoot to put things in December, but I know that there might be a request to move the date of this meeting in December because of refurbishments to the council chamber, and also the need to use this room by full council, I think, on the 20th, possibly. One suggestion put to me was that we move the date up earlier and have the meeting in the conference room, which means it would not be live streamed. I don't particularly want to, could be by Skype, but not in the normal way. Yeah. Well, I was wary of that, and also wary about reducing the time between the two meetings, given that we don't at the moment appear to have a very full agenda. What I'd like to suggest is that we don't hold this meeting in December. that the next meeting will be the January meeting. If the amount of work looks burdensome, I'll call us an extra meeting of the committee at some point. So do
I
we
think that
agree
that makes sense, Chairman, because there's two items on there, and I would, well, deadline for finalised reports and finalised reports.
That's just routine
nothing,
about
is it?
deadlines. Yeah. So if there's no objections to that, I propose we meet again in January. But again, if circumstances change, we'll reconsider. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a good Christmas and a happy New Year. And I'll see you at the end of January. Thank you.
Okay, great. Cheers.
See you, folks.
Yeah, cheers, folks. Yeah, so that's what we're going to do. Just in terms of
just put it to I'd like to take this second.